Good morning. All right, so we're going to get started. Welcome to SCOR's 36th Annual Social Justice Symposium. Our theme this year is Sankofa, honoring the past and strengthening our future democracy. I'm Michaela. I'm on SCOR's e-board as this year's symposium chair, and I will be, emceeing this event. So just to start off, a few housekeeping notes. We do have refreshments around the corner in the back. We'll be serving lunch at about 11:15. But you are welcome to grab water, juice, beverages, and things of the sort. You should have QR codes for our digital program. This will take you to our Google site. That way you can keep track of our program. And there's also the QR code up here if that is easier to scan. This event will be recorded, so thank you so much to AV. And here we go. So just quick, this is our agenda for the day, which might have a typo on it, but it is about 10 a.m. And so let me introduce you into our symposium. Sorry, this is my first time doing this. But yeah, honoring those who came before us. So we honor Dr. Catherine Brown, a pioneer who overcame racial and gender barriers to pursue medicine in the 19th century. We uplift Dr. Catherine Crawford, among just 150 licensed Black female physicians in the country at the time. Her legacy lives in us. We stand on the shoulders of giants, visionaries who paved the way through grace, grit, and unwavering purpose. A quote, "Some experiences were exceedingly bitter, immensely so as I view them after more than a quarter of a century, but they taught me my capacity for endurance." And that is from Dr. Catherine Brown. It's also the 150th anniversary of Dr. Edward Boucher's PhD. Dr. Boucher graduated summa cum laude from Yale College in 1874 and became the first African-American nominated to the prestigious Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society. In 1876, he made history as the first African-American to earn a PhD in the United States. Yeah, no, clap it up. And he's only the sixth person of any race in the Americas and he was only the sixth person of any race in the Americas to earn a doctorate in physics. That's huge. I went to MIT in undergrad, and this is something that I even know because it's that important. Dr. Boucher completed his groundbreaking doctoral dissertation on geometrical optics, specifically focusing on measuring refractive indices. He was denied university faculty and research positions due to systemic racism. And yet, he spent 26 years teaching rigorous chemistry and physics courses at the Institute for Colored Youth, or ICY, in Philadelphia. His name lives on through the Edward A. Boucher Graduate Honor Society, which is founded by Yale and Howard University, and the American Physical Society's Boucher Award, which champions diversity in modern STEM. And finally, to our theme, what is Sankofa? Sankofa is a word in the Akan language of Ghana that means to go back and get it. Sankofa is often symbolized as a bird with its feet facing forward and its head turned backward, representing the importance of looking to the past to inform the future and lifting one another as we climb. And on this theme, I would like to now turn to our three speakers that will reflect on the theme of Sankofa, starting with Dr. Rob Sellers. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
This is a extreme honor and pleasure to be here It is, in many ways, for me, quite personal and surreal. 40 years ago, over in LS&A in November of 1985, about 10 of us, graduate students, got together for a meeting from primarily the social sciences, but we had, I think, a couple of someone from physics, and I forgot someone from English. Got together as graduate students. Most of us were first-year graduate students, and wanted to figure out what kind of organization we could develop across all of the doctoral programs. So as students of color, predominantly African American, but not only African American, we were trying to figure out. There had already been a number of student organizations. BSPA was, in the psychology was already there. Balsa and a number of other graduate students of color organizations were across campus, but there wasn't anything that represented the experience of being a Rackham doctoral student. And so we ended up coming together and forming what was then MORE, the minority organization of Rackham, which is what now SCOR is. And during one of those meetings, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what our name would be. So just so you know, even back then, there was the question of, well, should it be minority or should it be students of color? We weren't smart enough to come up with, to drop the O in students of color, so we decided against SCOR then because we only thought of SOCOR. We didn't think of SCOR, and we wanted the name to roll off. But that was you all. So to look forward 40 years and see the legacy of, again, about 10 graduate students, most of us literally in our first semester in graduate school, coming together and having this, and having it not only do the great impact that SCOR has done over the years, but even today to be in this room is just absolutely amazing. I'm sure most of you can't even imagine what 40 years looks like. I could not imagine what 40 years would look like. So congratulations to you, and just to give you a sense of how important this is. I was asked not only to mention SCOR, or the founding of SCOR, but to also talk about how the organization and my experience in it has impacted my career and my experiences. So I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I can because it is extremely expansive and influential in terms of the impact that SCOR has had on my career and my life. Some of the things that I got out of SCOR, it taught me a number of practical skills that I didn't necessarily get as much training and opportunity to do in my graduate program, or augmented those in a way that not being in SCOR would have been problematic. First and foremost is the opportunity to speak in public, and to speak in public in a variety of different settings, and to feel comfortable in speaking in public. One of the things that we did back then is we also had opportunities for folks to present their research to each other. So that you learned how to not only present in a professional way and field questions, perhaps more importantly, you learned how to formulate and create questions in areas that you didn't necessarily have expertise in, but gave you what I would call a sharper mind, a more critical mind. So public speaking, grant writing was another thing. Learning how to write and ask for money and make a case for why we should get $200 to do this or to do that has impacted my ability to get a little bit more money over the years. Perhaps most importantly was planning and strategizing. We spent a lot of time thinking about how to move forward the organization, but also how to have an impact on this campus. So at that time, we're talking about during the BAM UCAR movement, the BAM 3 UCAR movement that ultimately resulted in the establishment of a vice provost for minority affairs, permanent support for the Black Student Union, what later became the Michigan Mandate, which predated DEI efforts. So it was very consequential. And most of the people who were in UCAR, which was the United Coalition Against Racism, and the BAM 3 movement, the Black Action Movement, were also in SCOR, and actually many of us wore multiple hats at the time. It also gave me a lesson of the importance of always emphasizing community and the way it has emphasized the notion of community in the way in which I do my work and always do my work. And that's, if you really want to be impactful, you need to always build a community with you. You can do more things exponentially when you have a community. But that community has to be people that you can count on. So it can't just be folks you like. Most importantly, they have to be folks you respect, where you have common goals, common values, but diverse skills and diverse perspectives. That's the team that's going to get you forward. And to always seek that out. That doesn't just happen. So I spend my entire life watching and looking to recruit folks, both folks who are younger, folks who are older, folks who are the same age, folks in the field, folks outside of the field, because that is ultimately the pool of folks that will ultimately be a part of my community. And that philosophy is the same philosophy I also take in working with graduate students. I don't want graduate students who only know what I know and only believe what I believe. I want graduate students with different perspectives who are interested in learning and asking questions and pushing, but at the same point in time are people that I can have fun with, that are just plain good people that I wouldn't mind hanging out with. So that philosophy of creating a community with you is extremely important, and again, one of those things I learned with SCOR. A third thing is, if you're going to build anything or change anything, that experience taught me the importance of long-term structural change. That as a psychologist, we tend to focus on individual characteristics and the importance of those experiences, and which is good and important, and individual motivations often play a role. But if you want to make change, and particularly change that will last, you have to understand the structure in which you play. So you have to understand how the university works, how your department works, or how the local government work if you're looking to make change. And so having a structural understanding of things is extremely important. And in understanding those things, understand that while resources are often necessary for that long-term change, it isn't sufficient. Understand how resources work and how resources don't work. When is the access of resources used in the most efficient and effective way? These are things that I learned from SCOR. Perhaps one of the things that I've tried to put in play most is the idea of thinking at multiple levels at the same time. Most of the things that we experience in the world, particularly if we're talking about any kind of change or building something, is going to play out at multiple levels. Sometimes it will play out both in terms of the here and now, but also the future. And if you're looking to build something or looking to change something, you have to have an eye for understanding both what's happening now and what's happening in the future. The best example I can think of is thinking of now as dealing with weather versus thinking in the future dealing with climate. Because sometimes the same kinds of things have different impacts for now and for the future. And if you want something to last and be sustained for 40 years, you've got to think about it both in the terms of the here and now and also the future. If you don't take care of the future, if you just think about, if you don't take care of the now, though, you won't get to the future. So thinking in both of those ways. The other thing is I've learned think structurally, but engage relationally. Make sure that you're not only thinking about what SCOR will look like in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, but what are people getting or not getting out of it? What are individual people getting or not getting out of it? So always engage and think about people. One of the things that was also important was as we were building SCOR, we got a lot of support and engagement, and I had the great opportunity to meet with a lot of folks in various powerful situations that most graduate students don't. So we knew the Dean of Rackham well, knew the president, well, more importantly, they knew us. We had structural things to make sure that they knew us, so we had regular meetings scheduled with them. When we had social events, we'd invite them. We even gave awards and recognition so that they would come to us and they would know who we were, not just when we needed something, but that we made ourselves important to them, which led to understanding something really important, which is, again, impacted my career. You should be in awe of no one. So never be in awe of a title, never be in awe of a person's accomplishments, etc. But you should respect everyone, every single person. If you have that philosophy, you will learn a lot more than not, because you'll be open to talking to people that you're traditionally afraid of connecting or thinking you're not worthy of connecting. But more importantly, you will learn from people who you may not think are worthy of teaching you. And you're going to learn a lot more from those people than you are with those with the title, etc. So these are the things that were most important in my experience, and probably the most important was having a purpose. SCOR or more at the time was extremely important in providing a purpose. Obviously, I had a purpose of coming to the University of Michigan and getting a PhD, but a purpose of trying to make the institution better was something that probably made it easier for me to get through, gave me a sense of the university being my university, so it wasn't just, oh, I'm trying to change this place because it's so horrible, it's the oppressor, but instead a sense of ownership that it was my university, which also fed into a sense of belonging and belief that I was supposed to be here. And that sense of purpose is something that will be extremely important to you, not only here, but further in your life. So these are all reasons why SCOR has been extremely important to me in my career. And with that, I want to congratulate you in celebrating the 36th anniversary of this symposium. And I wish you a great day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your wise words, Dr. Sellers. I'm going to be very brief. I do have some sad news that Elizabeth James will not be able to join us today, so after I give my little spiel, we'll move on to our flash talks. But like I said, we're very excited about this event. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. So I was asked to talk about what SCOR has done for me as a current student and like looking towards the future in line with our theme. So in line with some of the things that Dr. Sellers shared with us, I think that SCOR has really pushed me to be a better version of myself. Standing up here talking is not my favorite thing to do, but I have definitely learned how to have better communication skills and talk to people who I normally would not interact with. Also, SCOR has really just given me a safe space to be myself in a university and in a society where I don't see a lot of people who look like me, and that has been an integral part of my graduate school journey thus far. Also, I would like to say that SCOR has really given me a more positive view of what the future can be. I tend to be quite pessimistic, especially given the current socio-political climate, but I think that in line with the radical healing framework that I draw from in my academic work and in my personal life, that SCOR really encourages me to take that radical hope to heart and know that through the community that we build here and the activities like this and the other things that everyone in this room does outside in your research and personal lives, that we really can craft a more equitable and just future, even if it doesn't always seem like we have the easiest path forward. So I'd like to leave you all with one of my favorite quotes by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he told us that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So that's something I've been trying to hold on to, and I encourage you all to take that with you and just remember that although we are in a very precarious socio-political climate, that through our work and our advocacy, things can and will continue to get better. So thank you all.
Thank you so much to both of you for reflecting on SCOR, both our past and our present. Now we're going to turn to our student faculty flash talks. These have been added to this year's symposium schedule as a means to increase visibility about the diverse array of things that we're doing as grad students, along with giving exposure to the amazing faculty that we do have at this institution. So we will be connecting our community. Our first flash talk will be from Casey Cook in the dance department.
Put this. I guess I could just freestyle. That's my specialty. But I do got a couple notes. Hello, everybody. I'm not that tall. What's good? What up, though? I think I'm gonna just play the video first, and then talk about it, and then receive the feedback. But the noise came from here. A homage to the Old West Side was my thesis project, and I'm a MFA in dance, so we have to do a production, a dance production. And yeah, I'll play it and then kind of talk about it.
Welcome, 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 everyone. We are here for a performance, one that seeks to amplify the history of the Old West Side. My family today is the living dream of those who came before us. Our ancestors who planted their roots in Ann Arbor over 120 years ago. We are still here. You see, we are still here, and we still have our home. But many former residents, Black residents, residents who were not allowed to live anywhere else in the city but here because of the color of their skin, they are now displaced. You see, this neighborhood, which is most recently known as the Carytown and the Waterhill neighborhoods, was once a thriving Black community. And now, it is just not the same. You see, this performance is not a historical retelling of the neighborhood that my parents and my grandparents experienced. However, it is creatively inspired by it. And for that, we are all incredibly grateful. So let this performance today be a message to anyone and everyone that can hear it, that we are still here. Let the noise come from here today, because the noise always came from here. The noise came from here.
You're not the boss of me. 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 You're just a president. No one elected me. Bitch, I'm arrested. No, I ain't the flow you worship. 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 Between a circle of drums and a constellation. A wireless message in music.
I'm like, how should I do this? Because my note's right there, but I'm like, okay. First thing I want to say is, although I'm not the most upstanding and consistent member of SCOR, SCOR has situated me as a Black grad on this campus. I get kind of siloed on North Campus in the dance department, but it has situated me amongst other grads of color, and that's been very rewarding in my 3 years here. And then I would like to actually comment on Sankofa. The first time I heard about Sankofa was in my undergrad experience at Northern Illinois University. I was in a sister group type vibe that was Black sisterhood group, and we definitely did our research and lineage on things. So Sankofa was something I learned there, and I feel like all the way up to my thesis, I feel like it's played a role in my life, because being here at the University of Michigan, one of my professors in performance studies told me, like, you're now different from the community you come from, because I come from street dance. So being in a dance programs around the country are, especially at the undergrad level, are traditionally very Eurocentric. I was a dance minor in undergrad, and they only had ballet and modern. So here, it's like, oh, they're saying now I'm different from the community I come from. Like, so I'm always looking at my positionality in that case, because I am very blessed to be here, and I do have a sense of privilege of being here. And so I think that leans directly into knowing where I come from, but then also looking at my thesis. I'm in a place of position in a space where Black folks have been displaced, and their history, it is being documented, but like, how can I amplify it? I study street, social, Black dance, particularly Black American dance. I am interested in the diaspora as well, but I practice and study mainly Black American dance. And so I wanted to reclaim space for my thesis. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna reclaim space. And my thesis chair was like, so what's new? Like, what's your angle? What's new about that? Because the Black dancing body, although it has been on the margins in the theater, there are many people all over the US who are Black dancers who are reclaiming theaters and doing a bunch of great things. And so one of the other things I was doing before I came here was, like, I was presenting in parks in Chicago. And so I was like, okay, I want to reclaim space in the theater and the park. And the park I looked at was Albert Wheeler Park, because they were throwing Juneteenth there. So I was like, I want to do it at that park. Then come to learn the history about that park being situated in the historically Black community. So then the thesis, the world of, like, researching and everything really became more focused. And I do want to say I developed it in direct conversation with people in that lineage. And although it's not a historical retelling, like she said, it was creatively inspired by it. And so that was very important to me, because I didn't want to retell their story or them not even know that this was something I was taking on. So various people were involved in the process who have that lineage. And I think I can open it up in this case for any questions that y'all might have. So it wasn't shown in the video. So yeah, most of it was a heavy, like, improvisational score. And with a score, it's like we did kind of like that circle, which, like, comes from, like, the ring shout and, like, a cipher in hip hop. So we know where to go into those things, like where in the music to go into those things, but the movements they were doing were freestyle. I think the only really choreographed movement was, there was a crump section at the end. It wasn't shown in that, but we had a crump section, and my homie helped choreograph that section. So that was choreographed. And I kind of see we did the ballroom hustle as, like, a choreography that everybody knows. So that's kind of choreographed in a sense. But yeah, most of it, like, I want to say 85% was improvisation, but like they know where to fall into certain concepts. Like we also did like a Soul Train line. So. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Next, we'll hear from Peyton Harvey, who's a master's in public health student.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing this morning? Good. Okay, well, I can begin. Hi, everyone. My name is Peyton Harvey. I'm a first-year Master's of Public Health student studying health behavior and health equity with a certificate of entrepreneurship, and I'm here to present my project, Empower Her in Action, a youth-led needs assessment report. So during my undergraduate tenure at the University of Michigan, because I'm a double go blue, I founded a for-profit organization, Empower Her Group, dedicated to the advancement of dedicated to the advancement of developmental and educational opportunities for young girls in the Detroit area. And through this initiative, I've had the pleasure of engaging with hundreds of girls in the Metro Detroit area and now conduct after-school programming at Ernest T. Ford Recreation Center in Highland Park, Michigan. So at the Recreation Center, staff and I have noticed that many middle school girls struggle with emotional expression and communication issues, yet there was no targeted program to address their needs or address this demographic in general. This is especially important when considering the broader context of Black girls' experiences, as research shows their emotional needs are often overlooked or misunderstood while they navigate broader social and structural challenges that might impact their well-being. This realization became the starting point for Empower Her in Action, a youth-led needs assessment report focused on understanding the social and emotional needs of adolescent girls in this community, which has been funded by the Ginsberg Center Community Center Engagement Small Grants and research in collaboration with my professor and mentor, Dr. Sari Afyang, in the back right there. Okay. So building upon the principles of community participatory research, the goal of the project aimed to engage middle school girls directly in identifying their own needs and helping them design programming that will address these needs. So social and emotional needs such as self-regulation, empathy, autonomy, and social awareness are critical components of development that shape how young people navigate relationships, make decisions, and engage in their environments. When these needs are unmet, it can impact both individual well-being and how young people show up in community and school spaces. So research on Black girls' educational experiences shows that youth-led approaches can shift power dynamics and produce more authentic insights. It also shows the importance of community listening and intellectual humility, recognizing Black girls as experts of their own experiences rather than passive recipients of programming. Additionally, youth-centered, co-designed programming can have the potential to strengthen self-efficacy, increase awareness of resources, and build meaningful support networks for young women just like these girls navigating complex social and economic challenges. There we go. So therefore, in this project, we applied that approach through interactive group sessions using activities intentionally designed to reduce power imbalances and create space for open dialogue. Rather than assuming what the youth need, this project aims to center their voices, experiences, and ideas in shaping future programming through 3 phases: a needs assessment phase, a co-design phase, and a youth-informed programming phase. So during our needs assessment phase, which is this project's report, with the needs assessment being defined as a structured and participatory process used to identify concerns within a population and inform evidence-based responsive programming, a series of 3 workshops were conducted with the girls at the center, and each girl was compensated financially for her time. Activities included community mapping, group discussion, and reflection exercises designed to help participants talk about their experiences across 3 key spaces in their lives: school, home, and the recreation center. These sessions help the girls focus on identifying what's going well for them, their own strengths, assets, and values, but also identify the challenges they face and the types of supports they wish existed. Okay. So from these conversations and activity, the youth identified several key themes. Firstly, when the girls frequently discussed mental health challenges intertwined with friendship dynamics. Firstly, the girls frequently discussed mental health challenges intertwined with friendship conflict, home dynamics, and compounded upon by the influence of social media. Secondly, many girls reported school as the place where they felt least emotionally supported, often feeling unheard or dismissed by adults in their lives, and lacking the safe spaces to express these emotional stressors. The girls identified spaces like the Ernest T. Ford Recreation Center as a place that can fill this gap and be a place where they might feel more uncomfortable engaging in conversations surrounding their well-being. But overall, most of the girls reflected the just internal need for emotional expression through just having someone to talk to or having a structured and safe space. And so based upon our sessions, the girls came up with 3 solutions. A girls group with guided conversations aimed to target peer communication and relationship building. A girls wellness day or a calm room within the center to address their emotional needs. Or a youth lock-in or bonding activities with staff to strengthen relationships with some of the adults in their lives. So why does this matter? By engaging young people in this participatory way, some key observations were made. First, when the girls were asked to identify strengths, many struggled to name positive attributes about themselves, often linking this difficulty to criticism or discouragement from the adults in their lives. Secondly, in order for the girls to feel comfortable expressing personal and sensitive challenges, we cannot just approach these conversations directly. We use interactive activities, helping to create a more safe environment where they gradually opened up. And many insights only emerged through continued probing and guidance, insights we most likely would not have gotten without fostering that emotional safety. Next, group discussions generated much deeper engagement than individual reflection, allowing the girls to build on each other's experiences and develop a more clear picture of their shared needs. Additionally, during these solution building activities, many girls struggled to connect a specific need with a specific activity or program that would address it, kind of indicating limited exposure to an environment where their social and emotional needs are intentionally addressed. Encouragingly, though, just across these past 3 sessions, we've already seen increased participation, stronger buy-in, and deeper engagement with the Recreation Center. So these observations underscore why this work is super important, not only to ensure young people have a voice in shaping their communities, but also because the process itself can play a meaningful role in their well-being. Okay. Ultimately, Empower Her in Action is about one thing: the value of youth-led approaches in community health programming. The next phase of this project focuses on turning these insights into action. Findings from the needs assessment will be shared with parents, educators, community members, schools, and local stakeholders in Highland Park and beyond to ensure youth perspectives continue to inform broader conversations around adolescent well-being. We are currently in the co-design phase of the project, working directly with the girls to develop programming based on the needs they identified, with the goal of implementing it at the rec center by the end of the year. I want to wrap up the presentation by leaving you with a quote. I want to wrap up the presentation by leaving you with a quote from one of the girls shared recently while participating in one of the co-design phase sessions. She says, "Through this program, when people hear me out, I feel powerful. I feel like my voice is respected. I'm learning for the first time how to be a leader." Thank you. Any questions? Yes. Of course, definitely. I think from this needs assessment, so much valuable information was gathered, not that could be not just that is applicable to middle school girls, but anyone who engages with young people in any way. And so me and my professor's goal is to develop more of a standardized way of delivering this information. Like I said, it'll be shared with other schools, other stakeholders, similar youth-focused organizations, just to kind of get the message out. I feel like there's a lack of emotional training with adults who maybe interact with youth, and so the goal is to just increase awareness.
Thank you so much, Peyton. Next, we'll be hearing from Dr. Junior West and Banya Ebo, who is a PhD candidate in the West Lab.
Amazing. Thank you, Michaela, and thanks for everyone for organizing this amazing session. We're really happy to be here today. I'm an assistant professor here in the Molecular, Cellular, and Developmental Biology department. I've been here for about a year and a half now, almost going on 2 years, so I guess I'm relatively new. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to say that, but I'm relatively new, so it's really nice to learn more about SCOR and be here and talk with all of you here today. So today I have with me, as Michaela mentioned, Banya Ebo, who's a PhD student in my lab. And I'll kind of give a quick overview of what we do in the lab, and Banya will talk more specifically about what she's been working on. And so in our lab, we are cell biologists. So we try to understand how cells work. Our particular focus is a specific type of cell that is found in your body called epithelial cells. And these cells are important for creating barriers and lining all of your organs within your body. And they do this by forming connections and cell-cell contacts with one another. So they stick together and they form sheets and various structures within your body. And in order to do this, they need to establish very well-structured architecture. But in addition to that, at different times throughout your life, these epithelial cells need to become dynamic and move around and remodel and change in their structure and their architecture. And this is what we're really interested in, is understanding how these epithelial cells change in structure, what are the cellular mechanisms that drive these. I don't know if this movie's playing. This is a movie showing an example of this. This is an organoid, or a miniature version of an organ that we can see, that we grow in a dish. This movie would show you that these cells are growing and moving and having all these dynamic movements. And so that's what we're really interested in studying in our lab. So we study these processes in various different contexts, in both normal physiological contexts, but also in the context of cancer, and specifically in metastatic disease. And so the reason why we study metastatic disease, specifically metastatic breast cancer, is because we know that when patients show up in the clinic and they present with a tumor that is localized in their breast, they, through various decades of research, we've been able to treat these patients very effectively. And they have what we call a 99% 5-year disease-free survival. So there's a 99% chance that within 5 years, a patient that presents with localized breast cancer will be disease-free. However, if this disease spreads to other organs in your body, this metric goes down significantly. It goes down to 30%, right? And so we're really interested in understanding, or this is what motivates why we do the research that we do. And metastasis, broadly, is the process where cells that start in a primary tumor, for example, in your breast, gain the ability to leave that primary site, become motile in most cases, travel throughout your body, and then land in a distant organ and grow as a new tumor in that organ. And so we're really interested in studying at various scales how this process works. I think Dr. Sellers mentioned you got to think of a problem at various scales. And from a scientific perspective, we think about these from the molecular scale to the cellular scale to the tissue level and the whole organismal level. And as I mentioned before, we are looking again at how these molecules that help cells stick together, how they're regulated and how they drive these processes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Banya, and she'll tell you a little bit more specifically about what she's been working on.
So up to now, we've been talking about cancer as kind of one thing, but cancer is really uncontrolled cellular growth, like replication and growth, and can have many possible mechanisms. So it's not really one thing, it's many different things. And part of how we understand and organize breast cancers is by subtyping. And there's different criteria by which we can subtype breast cancers. And so this figure here kind of just illustrates how there are different criteria that we can use to subtype breast cancers, and they correlate with each other, but they're not always mutually exclusive. And these are based on normal tissue landmarks that provide possible mechanistic clues and therapeutic targets. So to kind of break this down a little more, in the top block, you see histology, which is based off of staining of tumor tissue slides. And so the expression of different hormone receptors is how you get like estrogen positive, progesterone positive, triple negative breast cancer. And you can also stain for different markers of cell type. So they can be more of a luminal cell type or more of a basal cell type. So this is more of historically how breast cancer patient samples were subtyped. However, newer subtyping technologies use transcriptomic information. So you look at the amount of mRNA of different genes present in a patient sample. And the current tests used, there are two different tests that use 50 different genes. They're called either the PAM50 or the Prosignia test. And based on the combination of expression of these these transcripts, you can organize patients into these 5 categories called the intrinsic cell types. So this is the most recent and most currently advanced technique for subtyping in the clinic. However, there is one weakness to this type of subtyping, and that is that we're looking for things that we already expect to be there. So we're kind of locking ourselves into a pattern locking confirmation bias. So to illustrate this point, it's as if cancers are very diverse. So it's as if we have a diverse group of shapes, samples, with different characteristics, but we only know to look for certain things. So using this criteria, we can make different groups, and these groups can be very important and very significant. In fact, the different breast cancer subtypes currently are very helpful for prognosis and treatment options. However, we do miss some more granular differences between the different samples. So instead of doing a small subset of genes and looking at the expression of their mRNA, you can do RNA sequencing, where you look at the entire transcriptome. So you're looking at all the proteins being expressed in the cell at one time. So this takes from just 50 to thousands of genes. And then you can use hierarchical clustering, which is a mathematical and statistical way of determining the largest differences between groups to make more detailed groupings. And so this has been done with breast cancer samples. And when done with breast cancer tumors, you find similar groupings to what you would expect in the subtypes we've already identified. However, there is one subtype that was not previously identified that comes up that would otherwise be categorized most likely as a basal breast cancer. And these are hallmarked by a reduction in tight junction proteins, which are the type of proteins that allow for the sticking together of cells that Dr. West talked about a little bit previously. And they also have increased stem-like characteristics, which might impact different treatment options and response to different treatments such as chemotherapy. So for my project, I looked at breast cancer cell lines, all the available cell lines that I could find, and I did an RNA sequencing analysis. And in our analysis, we saw that the Claudin-low breast cancers clustered very distinctly from the other breast cancers. This is a PCA plot. Essentially, we're looking at, it's like a two-dimensional plot that shows the overall differences, like, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this, sorry. So the dimensions for this plot, PC1 is the set of transcripts that give you the best statistical division. So we're looking at the like global changes in the groups. So closer together clustering means more similar based on like hundreds of different gene expressions. So we use this data to come up with different possible candidates that are driving this subtype, which would be helpful because it could identify either potential targets that could be used to impede cancer progression or just identification in clinic. And we're using gene editing technology to knock out these genes to see if they promote or suppress the Claudin low breast cancer signature.
Thank you.
I might be an audience plant, but I do have a question because I know we have discussed it before. This is something that you can't see necessarily at the clinical level yet, or you can't test for it. What would the impact be of eventually being able to find a way to test it?
So I think there is like many possible benefits, right? Oh. So I think that there's many possible benefits of being able to identify people in clinic with Claudin low breast cancer, because currently there are no tests. And Claudin low breast cancer makes up between like 4 to 15% of breast cancers, which is one of the most common type of breast cancers. And in women, it's 1 in 4 cancers are breast cancer. So that translates to thousands of people who have Claudin low breast cancer getting diagnosed each year, but don't know that they have that specific subtype. This subtype has different like aspects of its characteristics, such as like an increased stem-like characteristics, which can be attributed to a resistance to, like, has been correlated to resistance to chemotherapy treatment. So identifying patients with Claudin low breast cancer might help clinicians to better plan treatment options for the best patient outcomes.
All right, thank you so much. For our 4 out of our 5 talks, we now have Dr. Devon Payne Sturgis, Camille Ingram, and Chloe Thatch.
Alrighty, great. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation to present to you all this morning. So again, I'm Devon Payne Sturgis. I'm on faculty of the School of Public Health in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences. And with me are 2 wonderful MPH students, Chloe and Camille. And what we want to share is some work that they've been doing with me as part of my overall project called Respirar. So just to orient you guys a little bit here, I don't know if you are all aware, but you know, every piece of fruit, every vegetable, everything that goes into your food is likely handled by so many different other hands before it reaches your table, before it reaches the grocery store. And essential to this food production, really, but invisible to many of us as consumers, are migrant and seasonal farm workers whose impoverished working and living conditions are constant features of our agricultural system in this country. And the public health literature is actually replete with evidence of the physical and mental health harms among farm workers as direct outcomes of these living and working conditions. But in public health, we tend to focus on these impacts at the individual level rather than on the systems that are creating and maintaining these harms. And in my group, we contend that these conditions are deliberately produced as features of the migrant and seasonal farm worker agricultural labor system in this country. So through our project that I have named Respirar, we are examining the health conditions of migrant seasonal farm workers and their employer-provided housing in the Mid-Atlantic states, which are actually communities that are really understudied. Most work on farm workers is either conducted in North Carolina or Florida and California. And much isn't really known about migrant seasonal farm workers in the mid-Atlantic states. And so one aspect of the system that we are examining are migrant seasonal farm worker housing inspections and practices by the Maryland Department of Labor. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kemal and Chloe.
Yeah, so to give a little background on what exactly we did during this project and why we did it. So why are we using MDDOL, which is the Maryland Department of Labor, inspections to understand the living conditions of H-2A workers in Maryland? So housing inspections are required for the H-2A program visa, which is, like she said, like for migrant seasonal farm workers, to come to this country and to have somewhere to live. It's actually required for them to live in the housing that is provided to them. So number one, housing inspections are required for the H-2A program application process. And then two, all H-2A workers have the legal right to live in housing that at least meets the minimum ETA or OSHA housing standards. So there's actually a new ruling that just came out under this current administration, where previously employer-provided housing was free to all migrant seasonal farm workers under this H-2A program, where now employers can reduce wages that are already low to live in the housing that is supposed to be provided. So especially if we're going to be charging for this housing, it's so important to make sure that it's meeting real living standards. And then for number three, we're trying to provide a new perspective for the Respirar project. So we did a lot of work in quantifying trends in housing under new methods, and then using these like farms that Chloe will talk a little bit about in a second, using the case study of farms to kind of represent a larger problem within the system of housing that's being provided for these workers, and then just provide new insights to the agricultural work system and understanding the stakeholders and who kind of has a role in creating or solving this problem.
All right, so we got a hold of these housing inspections through a Public Information Act request, and we looked at 10 different farms along the Maryland Eastern Shore from the years 2018 to 2024. And then from there, we screened the documents for completeness. We took a look at a bunch of different types of documents ranging from the actual inspection sheets, which you can see an example there, housing site photos, water quality reports, fire safety inspections, and first aid certificates. So from there, it was a bit of a messy process, but we tried to digitize what we saw in the inspection sheets into spreadsheets. So from there, we could look at overall trends and then analyze actual regulation compliance. So yeah, we took a look at almost 200 housing inspection reports, and you can see the quality of the reports ranged from like neatly typed reports to like messy handwritten comments and things like that. And there were 73 housing sites in this investigation, and we found trends under 3 primary areas. So there was some real inconsistent quality and rigor of the inspections, and that also included follow-ups. So if there was something wrong with the site at the time of inspection, we couldn't find enough evidence that the inspectors were actually making sure that there were remedies of these issues. And from there, we looked at, based on the inspectors' comments on the sheet, which showed what they saw at the time of inspection, did they check off that the site met criteria or did not meet criteria? We found that approximately 30% of past inspections were misgraded, meaning that they most likely did not meet the federal regulations at the time of inspection. And from there, we found some really concerning water quality issues. The picture below shows, it's really small, but it shows that there was nitrate contamination of the water. And then upon follow-up, like testing, which was required for that contaminant, they conveniently didn't include nitrate tests. And so the water was deemed as safe for people to drink from there.
Yeah, so to speak a little bit on our conclusions, obviously there was inconsistent quality and rigor of initial and follow-up inspections. I wish the sheets were bigger, but the handwritten inspection sheets were, almost unreadable sometimes. And if this is the way we're keeping records for where people are living and how they're living, I think that's kind of an issue. And then what Chloe spoke on earlier, there was just an inconsistency in rigor of these inspections. Some places or some inspectors kind of went a little further and did more work than others, and some just were more rigorous in their level of inspection of this housing and water, so it was kind of inconsistent. And then our second conclusion is that sites that pass inspection despite violations of standard criteria, kind of what Chloe just spoke on. There was almost 30% of the sites that we looked at kind of met this criteria that was either specified by ETA or OSHA. We're actually kind of misgraded when using the standards ourselves to determine whether this housing would have met criteria. And this is due to a number of reasons. There was a lack of standardized record keeping, a low number of inspectors. We learned that there's only 3 for the entire state of Maryland. So that kind of lowers the capabilities of the department. And then there's unclear priorities or goals of the DOL. So when we're thinking about the Department of Labor, as opposed to the Department of Health, who's usually doing these like housing and restaurant inspections like we all know, is there a difference in the goals that we're trying to seek through doing these inspections? Are we trying to bring in labor and trying to bring in people and make more money and improve, farming and improving our like food system over people's lives? I don't know, just unclear priorities. And then number 3, as Chloe just explained, these water quality issues were a huge deal, especially on farms where we're spraying pesticides and using fertilizers. Nitrate, there's a ton of leaching that can happen into the soil, which obviously is seeping into the water, especially when a lot of these houses are using private wells. So that's literally directly from the soil beneath them. So we have a couple recommendations that we've submitted. We talked about improving the inspection sheet and record system overall. The sheet itself is not laid out super easily for inspectors to determine what exactly they're supposed to be looking for and then what exactly is wrong. And then another recommendation is increasing capacity at the MDDOL to conduct these housing inspections. If we have 3 and then we're not meeting these quality levels for inspections, maybe upping that could probably help. And then on the water quality, just improving and kind of standardizing these water quality standards and making sure that we're actually meeting the standards that were set, and just kind of making sure that everyone is kind of on the same playing field when it comes to water quality. So we have a couple takeaways. Obviously, thinking of these as numbers for us was a big part of this project, but kind of when I translate that in my mind to people who are living in these housing that was provided for them is just egregious. So I think our identities shape our interpretations and recommendations, and promoting health and human rights first. Everyone, including migrant farm workers, obviously deserve to have safe housing, water, and working conditions. These people are already taking on very hazardous jobs. As someone who's worked on a farm, you know the risks that come with that. But then adding on, poor living and housing, water quality is just like exacerbating the health issues they could already have from just their daily job. So yeah, when we're thinking about data, let's not just think about the numbers, but think about the people that this is affecting. And then, we're going to continue our investigation and collaborate with stakeholders. We actually had a call with the Maryland Department of Health yesterday and got some answers on what's happening in Maryland. But then also, I think we just need to be a little bit more connected about where we're getting our food and where that food is coming from. There's a coalition right now working on Fair Food Michigan through the CIW, which is the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, a farm worker like advocacy group from Florida, to consider more fair food inputs for Michigan dining and Michigan catering, which I think is a great program, but also just being more mindful of where our food is coming from at the grocery store. And I guess kind of on the theme of Sankofa, looking back just over the exploitative nature of agriculture, not just in the United States, but across the world from the past, taking the native land and, practices from the Native Americans, and then continuing kind of using exploitative practices throughout slavery, sharecropping, even still today. And then we're continuing that through this kind of like unfair housing and labor treatment of migrant seasonal farm workers. So I think just being kind of cognizant of our food system and, just thinking a little bit more about who's behind the food that we eat every day.
Yeah, any questions?
I'm not too sure about how Maryland honestly compares to different states, but I will say throughout this process, we do have to learn more about like the structure of how this all works. For example, when we met yesterday with the Department of Health, we came forward with the water quality issues we were seeing, and from there, the state official was kind of saying, oh yeah, I'm not too surprised things are happening, but talk to the Department of Environment about that. So yeah, it is very complicated how these issues are dealt. It's not very clear from our perspective, like which department has authority over what. Yeah, do you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about like the housing and water quality standards, those are based on ETA and OSHA, so environmental and like obviously like working standards. So those standards are national and provided from the USDA and Department of Agriculture. But states go about determining the way they meet those standards in different ways. We've reviewed a sheet from North Carolina that looks completely different from the housing inspection sheet from Maryland, and then Department of the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington actually has a completely like digitized and public, database of all of their housing. So you could go up and look at the H2A housing in Washington right now, whereas in Maryland and North Carolina, all of those kind of inspection sheets and things. Obviously, you saw they're redacted for us, but those are all private in between the farm itself or the consultant and then the inspection authority, so the DOL or whoever takes that on for the state, Department of Health, Department of Labor,
There are migrant seasonal farm workers here in the state of Michigan, and there are research projects ongoing right now, actually at the School of Public Health. It's called the Michigan Farm Worker Project. And, similar, conditions are being identified. It's not just Maryland having these problems. And, I think a message here is just because there are a set of laws on the books or a set of regulations, it's important to think about how things are being implemented on the ground. And, looking at these inspection sheets and this amazing analysis that they have been able to do really provides us a picture of what has been going on and able to look at it as trends over time. And one of the things I think is really beneficial to this is that, the Department of Labor in the state of Maryland, because these things are all handwritten and typed, I don't see how they have any way of actually evaluating their own program and the effectiveness of their own work. So this is actually a benefit of having this kind of let's just take a look at this, and we will digitize this information and be able to look at what are the patterns over time, and we're going to be able to share with them, because we have a meeting set up with the Department of Labor later in April to share the results of this report. And we're hoping this is, give them some insights about what they need to do to make improvements, if they're really, truly caring about their mission. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, and finally, we'll be hearing from Professor Eko Yanka, who is a Thomas M. Cooley Professor of Law and a Professor of Philosophy.
So thank you all for having me. I must say it's both really remarkable to be part of this Michigan community, and particularly this community within Michigan. It's a little intimidating to follow people who are trying to cure cancer and touching the very place where our food comes from and trying to bring justice to those who feed us. I will just say a couple quick comments, because part of this is about not just our work, but how our work can be integrated. And I will say, if our work at the law school doesn't feel quite as sometimes breathtaking as, curing cancer or reaching the stars, the one thing that we do have at the law school, of which we're tremendously proud, is the breadth of our work, which is to say, it will surprise none of you that one of the themes that plays out in presentation after presentation is that the way the law touches on and is interwoven in all the problems that we see, including, as you were just commenting, the failures of the law, how to improve implementation. And that's the thing about which we're proudest. I always say, everybody's parent really wanted them to be a lawyer. I know that's a lie. Everybody's parent wanted them to be a doctor. But after that, being a lawyer is an extraordinary thing, and I will say, just one quick note before collecting myself to be more coherent. I'm touched by the theme of Sankofa. My family is from Ghana. I grew up in Ghana as a child, and when I left Ghana at 9 years old, I left because there was a coup, as many of you know. Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings took over Ghana. It was by these things relatively bloodless, although I had schoolmates who didn't come to school the morning after the coup. And one of the memories that sticks out to me as a child was seeing a tank roll down the street of my neighborhood. I say that because I have the great honor and good luck that many years later, starting my legal career, I worked at the law firm of Boies, Schiller, and Flexner. Boies, Schiller, and Flexner is famous for lots of reasons, none of which have to do with my being there. But the thing for which it's most famous is that the thing for which it's ironically most famous is a case it lost rather than the many cases it won. Boies, Schiller, and Flexner represented Al Gore in the Supreme Court in Bush v. Gore when Al Gore lost his bid for the recount of the presidential election. Why do I bring this all up? Because it strikes me as one of my great good fortune, one of my great honors to work in a law school here. And it's always struck me because it never leaves my mind that when I was growing up and there was a constitutional crisis, in my country, the army was called. In America, when there was a constitutional crisis, they called lawyers. And that is not something we should take for granted. It is a remarkable thing that the way we settled the most powerful office in the world was to call lawyers. And that's the thing for which I'm proud. The other thing I want to say is that the law school is, by my modest measure, the most beautiful place on campus. It is. And I say that because it has that beautiful enclosed quad feeling, which we all enjoy on a sunny day. But I want to be very clear about something. I do not want us to make the mistake of thinking of the architecture of the law school as symbolic of its stance. That is to say, it may be a beautiful castle, but it is not a fortress. And I want to make sure that people here understand that one of the things that we most love at the law school is being able to work with our remarkable colleagues who can tell us what happens after we write laws to protect farm workers and tell us where the law is falling short. Tell us what happens once we discover ways in which certain communities are not finding health care or that we need to advance regulation in order. These are the things that my colleagues and I eventually hope our work touches. And so I want to invite people here to the extent we can. I'm lucky enough to be the Associate Dean of the Law School. I want to invite us to build more bridges and not take the castle to be a literal instantiation of our attitude at the law school. With that being said, let me just say really a couple quick words. As you know, I'm in not just the law school, but the philosophy department, and that describes the set of research questions I have. I suppose one way to describe it is that half of my work is political philosophy and the other half would be criminal theory. So the set of questions on which I work are questions that I think of as the most basic political theory 101 questions. Why are we obligated to follow the law? What makes it the case that if big, strong men with guns come and collect you for violation of a certain norm, they're enforcing the law? But if they just come and collect you to take your money, they're robbing you. Unless it's past April 15th, in which case they're collecting legitimate taxes, and on and on and on we go. What makes one set of things legitimate collective action and another set of things violence and unjustified? It surely can't just be the clothes they're wearing, and so we need to ask questions about when those lines are crossed. The way I answer those questions is to ask a set of questions about political obligation stretching all the way back to Aristotle, comparing our commitment to, but sometimes over-deification of individual rights to, and perhaps influenced by the way I grew up, the ways in which we have mutual duties, not just against each other, but to each other, the ways in which we're inter-bonded in a civic project, and the ways in which equality makes demands of us. After, assuming I could answer that question, what is it that bonds us in a civic society? I then ask questions of, if you believe that picture, how would that translate into the way in which our criminal law works? And so my work, again, straddles political philosophy and criminal theory. I'll give you just a few quick examples of the papers I've been working on. These are, again, just exemplars before wrapping up with questions on how that reflects in graduate work. I'm very conscious that I'm alone up here as opposed to most of you, and I want to speak about that in just a moment. So, for example, some of the pieces I've worked on recently is a paper called Deputization and Privileged White Violence, and that takes as the question the ways in which the criminal law does not always discourage violence as against racial minorities, but is in many ways protected violence as against racial minorities. If you take, for example, the position that our Constitution was founded on a claim that white people could use force in order to ensure that black people were not escaping them as slaves, right? Follow that through the fugitive slave laws and then sundown laws and Jim Crow, which were not just a Southern phenomenon, but throughout the country, then it might not surprise us as much when individual people take it themselves to be legally authorized to enforce not just the law, but the law as they see it. So when you interview the men who chased down Ahmaud Arbery and shot him, the interesting thing is they did not view themselves as vigilantes. They viewed themselves as enforcing the law. So too did George Zimmerman when he attacked Trayvon Martin, and examples like this go on and on. The question I want to ask there is not the question of police violence, which has gripped the country for rightful reasons, but the question of the ways in which people are frozen by private violence. So that's one set of thoughts on which I've been working. Another is a piece on prison conditions as civic betrayal. Remember, I started by claiming that part of the ways in which we are obligated to obey the law and that we're interwoven is a claim that depends on us being treated as equal citizens, including those who we punish. That is to say, there are people we may have to punish, but part of punishing them is reintegrating them into civic society. Right? If the premise is I get to punish you because we're equal citizens, so too my punishment must promise that you can be reintegrated. And the claim there is that there's certain ways of treating people that make it impossible for you to look them in the eye and say that one day you're going to reintegrate them. The simple moral experiment is there are ways that I can't treat my child consistent with saying that my child is going to continue to be a healthy part of our family. And so too, certain prison conditions make it impossible to look somebody in the eye and say, after you're punished, you will rejoin us. I also point out that the ways in which we've punished have often tracked, and there's interesting law on this in antebellum America, that the ways in which you punish people track the ways in which you could treat black people. That is, the minimum way in which prisoners could be subjected to punishment and torture was the minimum thing that was considered appropriate for a black person. And so I want to think about the way in which prison conditions that fall beneath a certain standard betray our ability to say that we're going to be civic equals. That said, I then also enjoy turning my attention to other questions, and questions that in some ways can be surprising to my colleagues, or at least are, I think, importantly in conversation and tension with my colleagues. I think that's part of our highest good. So I'm writing a paper that's called Securing the Past, and it argues that some of our most important political fights are actually not about the future. They're not about what we'll get when. They're about how we view the past. The simplest example of this is something like this. Once you make clear to somebody that some of the ways in which they have been benefited in life depend on things that were unjust, there's a real way in which you unstabilize their view of how their life has gone, right? So if you remember moving into that big house because your dad got a promotion, and that being a moment of celebration in your family, and somebody points out that, well, at that time, your dad's company didn't promote any women, and thus, then that moment of celebration is tinged for you in important ways. And I think it gives us a light into some of our the virulence of some of our political fights today that don't seem to be about anything like who makes more money in the future, but rather they're about people protecting their past. And lastly, I'm presenting a paper currently that's called Taking Victims Seriously. And that argues that while abolitionism, and in particular the racial critique of abolitionists, have made really important contributions to criminal theory, that abolitionism can make a mistake in not seeing that we have important reasons to punish certain people. And in particular, some of those reasons are counterintuitively is the word I'm looking for, ways in which punishment can affirm equality. That is to simply say if somebody wrongs you, the only question I'm going to ask is whether or not there's a, say, cost-benefit to punishing them, is a way in which we would forget that you're being wronged demands some response, ways in which we affirmatively say you cannot treat somebody like that. And that's interesting because so many of my colleagues, whom I respect and even hold dear, have made these powerful abolitionist critiques. And so to bring to them some pushback has been rewarding. Those are my set of projects, and I say them just as a representative sample, not as uniquely special. My colleagues, one of the great things, as in all your departments, is that each of us thinks that our projects are the most interesting ones available. And that's true even of my civil procedure colleagues, which is odd. So I present this as an example with one last note. Though law is different in that I don't have a single lab with a set of students, I don't want that to be mistaken as saying that we don't have students who we get to bring in and in some sense raise to be young academics. Both in our JSD program, which is a PhD program for law, there are two versions, I won't get into details. One for foreign lawyers who come in and study in advance, and one for PhD American lawyers. I'm happy to go into those details. But also in the philosophy department, and in one other program which I'm pleased to help lead, which is our Law and Philosophy Colloquium, which is half graduate students in philosophy and half law students. Spaces like that are spaces where over and over I get to contribute to grad students who are working on their advanced degrees and later on joining our academic world. I also have the job as the Associate Dean to help care for our Michigan Fellows, who are equally people with law degrees who are now finding an on-ramp to the academy. That is all a way of saying that there are countless opportunities for us to collaborate in ways in which, notwithstanding that we don't have the exact same structure of having graduate students, ways in which we are invested in graduate students having success in joining the academy, including collaborations, which we're happy to help structure. That's enough for me for now, but I hope the message over and over is that the law school is a place where we get to inspect the broadest questions, and hopefully in each of your projects have something to offer in ways of not just collaborating and improving your scholarship, but making the world outside of ourselves better. I'll stop there. I'm happy to take questions. Yeah. It's a great question. So often I'm looking at sort of broader American trends because so many of my questions are kind of foundational justification questions that are not just about, felony murder in Minnesota, although I've written on more specific things. But even the question itself is one that's amenable to philosophical inspection. So for example, here are two embedded questions. Why is it the case that if you commit a crime here, you'll be punished in a certain way, but if you happen to have committed the crime not 35 miles away from here in Toledo, or however far Toledo is, I don't know. Pardon? Whatever. Right. Impossibly far away in Ohio. Why is it the case that you'll be punished very, very differently? And by the way, we're not just talking about kind of abstract, hypothetical. In some states, you'll be capital eligible if you commit certain crimes. The state can kill you. And in other states, you will not. As many of you know, we've had searing conversations in our country about whether or not one jurisdiction can, for example, outlaw abortion while another doesn't. Your most important rights turn on local decisions about what is or is not justified. And that itself calls for justification, right? That is to say, what set of things should a local polity be able to control, and what set of things are rights that should not be up to democratic voting? And those are the kind of questions that I sometimes fight over. I do think there's a role for, I think there's an important role. One of the claims about republicanism, philosophical republicanism, is that you want more and more local control over the way in which people express their community values. I sometimes have this joke that if I weren't black, I'd be a Republican, which is not even a plausible joke anymore, sadly. But what I mean by that is the fundamental Republican instinct throughout history has been that there should be more and more local control. And it's precisely been the experience of Black Americans that local control also insulates local discrimination that makes that harder and harder to sell. But in a place where that weren't so searingly the case, you might think it's totally justified that in this state, they want their kids to be educated from 8 to 2 p.m. And in this state, they keep their kids to 5, and that their local values should be reflected differently. And those are some of the questions that grip me, including their interaction with race. Oh, that's a good question. So I think, well, I was going to say the answer is no, but that's an incomplete answer. So for example, you couldn't simply punish, you couldn't say something like, we're just going to punish Black people more for committing this crime. Now, as you well point out, we can look at the statistics and find out that the law in the books and the law in action are very, very different. Some of the research I work with are people who've, for example, researched the ways in which people are punished simply based literally on their skin color, not just their race, but darker skinned Black people are punished at even higher rates than lighter skinned Black people. People with broader noses are, so what happens on the ground is real. But even the way you ask the question introduces complications. So for example, we do think it's important, or most people think it's important, that you can punish people differently depending on the categorization of the victim. So for example, hate crime laws punish you more if you hurt people based on demographic and prohibited characteristics, on their race, their gender, their national origin. We can punish you more if you target people because they're old or because they're mentally disabled. So there is this constant push and pull between making the law more bespoke to protect people in certain ways versus the tension of how it is that we describe who it is gets special treatment. And philosophers worry about that question as well. Thank you so much. Thank you.